Against all laws. Uncle Sam doesn't mind admitting his army lost the Battle of Little Bighorn, because the U.S. Army of 266 men were outnumbered by the Cheyenne and the Sioux, who were gathered for the spiritual ceremony. They suspended the ceremony while they knocked off General Custer's and his Custaristias. I cannot say that word. The indigenous people were engaged in the Creator's business when attacked, and that's bad medicine. Like attacking people who were at worship in church. Or there are at least 3 battles where Uncle Sam doesn't like to talk about. This happened in 1812 war. There were only 2,000 English troops to defend 1,900 miles of frontier. As the British were busy with Napoleon in Europe, every available English soldier was on the old continent with other European armies trying to conquer the conqueror, Napoleon. Canada was actually defenseless, and what an opportunity for the U.S. to conquer Canada. The United States sent tens of thousands man army into Upper Canada and a 7,000-man force into Lower Canada. These later troops were marching on Montreal and had a little to go to search Ganhanakawi embarkation point for the island of Montreal. There was a wharf on the Ganhanakawi Reserve where the new-fangled streamers called packets took abroad horses and buggies and later even trains bound for Montreal until the Victoria of CPR bridges were built in 1860s and 1885 respectively. It was calculated that the whole week was required to ferry the army and equipment across the St. Lawrence River. Meanwhile, the army would occupy the Ganhanakawi village, and according to customs, when an army invades other countries, they would take over the homes, turn out the people, sleep in their beds, eat their food, and rape their women. I can't say the word, so I'm going to say blank of Gananiwaki did not appreciate this kind of attention from the dominant society, even if it was Canada's big brother, Uncle Sam. During the night before, the 7,000-man army reached Ganhanakawi, 600 indigenous quietly left the town and like shadows slipping into the position in the woods along the highway near Chattanooga. The army of conquest marched into the ambush in the morning, and the would-be rapists of indigenous women were cut out in the flower of their fighting days. Less than half returned to the U.S. faster than they had come. The report that there was an indigenous behind every tree, and there were millions of trees. The indigenous, they use a bad word that I cannot use, so I have to use indigenous, captured huge horses, wagons, and other army equipment, having no use for artillery. They turned those over to the defenders of Montreal. Oh yeah? Salisbury and his 300 men were stationed down the road waiting for the U.S. Army and took the credit for the victory without firing a shot. The indigenous of Ganhanakawi took on odds of more than 11 to 1 and won. The Upper Canada and Americans crossed into what is now known as Ontario into Canada's history book. Did 800 dead men stop 10,000 troops? Well, sir, it seems that 1,000 warriors from Ogeshkowen ambushed the Americans and drove them back across the border, and in doing so picked up a bad habit from the paleface. The Mohawks took credit for the victory, even though there were other indigenous presence. Since the victory was unheralded, as was the credit taking, it was fallen upon deaf ears. At beaver dams, likewise in Ontario, the Kanekawenge warriors wiped up the forests with the invaders. Fitzgibbons said all the fighting was done by the indigenous, and not a shot was fired by the white soldiers. Tens of thousands of troops versus 1,000 warriors is 10 to 1 odds. Again, the, quote, tigers of the forest prevailed. Canada was saved by the indigenous in the 1812 war. Great odds are against the indigenous in the psychological war waged against them. The strong shall survive. They shall have to struggle and fight for it. In the physical struggle, and strange statistic emerged in 1945, following the end of World War II. The most, quote, dangerous man in the world, end quote, was unmasked. Forgot his name after 35 years. He said, quote, "Give me 1,000 men, and I can bring down to its knees any country of the world, no matter how powerful," end quote. He was also the one who said that a, quote, a man fighting in a certain way is equal to 1,000 men, end quote. Let's analyze that. A chain is as strong as its weakest link. Every country is like a chain with weak links. They build nuclear power installations, which provide inviting targets for potential enemies, foreign and domestic. The more installations, the merrier. These installations can be destroyed. And released radiation fallout would itself destroy millions of people without further efforts by the enemy. A sort of bonus. More technology means more weak points for the powerful countries. A fighter can now take on odds up to 1,000,000 to 1 and win. Statistically, a lesson may be learned from the René Lavesquin's lament in the province of Quebec. Lavesquin's plan for Quebec's separation from the rest was the peaceful and legal way of referendum. It requires more than 50% of the people to win. A violent overthrow, such as a revolution, requires 10% of the people, even less. By coincidence, in every cause believed in by a certain number of people, only 10% shall fight for it. 90% of people are not able to be involved in controversies, confrontations, especially armed, or in any kind of possible trouble. They are called the sheep. Some definitions. Angels, fabulous celestial beings whose space suits are superior to those of the astronauts earthlings, who can only go to the moon or claim to. Civilization. 1. Refined corruption. 2. Progression from using wooden clubs to rule the people to using metal firearms besides the wooden club. Columbus. First white man to rob and slaughter indigenous peoples. To keep his memory alive, they set a day aside to celebrate his crimes and the example he set for the future robbers. Democracy, a government of, by, and for the people under the majority rule directed by the rich, clever minority. Economy, a system of wealth management whereby the super rich get richer and the poor go on welfare. Education, teaching the children of unintelligent parents who cannot teach their own children. Parents gladly pay to invade this duty. The establishment gladly provides the school as it gives them a chance to brainwash the kids. Government, a system of ruling or misruling, directed or misdirected at countries so that mighty may prevail. Heaven, an abode in outer space full of joy and happiness under the control of you guessing it, the white man. He decides who goes there. Its celestial reaches are dotted with indigenous reservations, where the good indigenous people who obey the white man here below go, and where they enjoy daily heavenly encroachments by pale-faced saints, the same crooks who dispose of us here in the name of God. Parley, throne of Columbus and Pizarro brothers, Kit Carson, etc., to make the indigenous people feel at home and not miss the good life here below. There is daily violations of the treaties. Indigenous reserves. New definition. Land set aside for the use by indigenous peoples and surrounded by thieves. Indigenous treaties. Paper tigers that eat up both the indigenous peoples and their land. Mock chiefs. Systems of chiefs of indigenous reservations devised by the colonizers from Europe, such as Canada's Band Council chiefs and the U.S. Tribal Council chiefs. The purpose of mock chiefs is to bury the system devised by indigenous peoples, such as the traditional systems. Pagan, one who doesn't believe in what the, quote, good claims to be. Policeman, a caveman with a club. Religion, one of many systems of worshiping God, gods or goddesses. Unorganized, natural religion doesn't cost a cent. Organized needs money in fabulous amounts. Rhetoric, beating around the bush. Saint, one who gives up the pleasures of this world in order to enjoy them in a pale-face heaven. Oh, he'll be a devil up there. Sin, that which is forbidden by the faithful, but enjoyed by their masters. Don't do what I do. Do what I tell you to do. Sinner, one who enjoys openly what the good enjoys in secret. Taxation, one-sided communism. You share your money with the super rich who are in control. Truth, reality, and facts, providing they do not conflict with one's own reality and facts. The revealed truth, quote unquote, was spread by the fire and the sword, and anyone who doubted was fit only to be burnt at the stake. The greatest truth is that most people don't know the truth about most truths. Unique, an overworked word in connection with Native Americans. It's white man's way of telling the indigenous peoples, you're alone, baby, you're alone. U.S. usurpa, a land invaded and stolen by foreign colonizers who usurped the authority from a native people. Usurpals, white people who boss indigenous peoples around. Welfare, bribe to the poor, destroy the recipients' initiatives, and fighting spirit helps keep the super rich in control. Summaries of indigenous situation. They used a bad word that I'm not allowed to say. Hi. Bring you up, but I don't think we're getting much. 1. We did not come from Asia. We originated in this land and are indigenous to the soil of Algonquin, America. We are Algonquin, not indigenous. They use the I word. An indigenous is an Indian is a native from India. According to the number 3, according to the dictionary, a S word is a primitive, barbarous, cruel, and brutal person. We can never hope to equal the Europeans in the S word manner. This land was stolen from us. 4. They called us, quote unquote, tribes, but recognize us as nations when they made treaties with us. For only nations can make treaties. 5. We have the right to our own area of land for our own territory, where we can exercise our own system of government and economy according to our customs and traditions. No other nation or power has the right to deprive us of our nationality, our lands, and our right to regulate our own lives. 6. We lived 1,000,000 years without being told what to do by foreigners. 7. We have been given a life to live, and it is our duty to protect this life and the lives of our people who may be less able. It is our duty to stop anyone who tries to destroy us individually or our people as a whole. It is the first law of nature, and the nation which ignored this law is now extinct. 8. As warriors, it is our right, privilege, and duty to fight for the most important thing in life, and these include survival as a distinct people and a race of nation. We have the right not to disappear into the melting pot devised by foreign people, which has been designed to destroy races and nationalities. That's why I think when I say this, the melting pot, I think it's just getting rid of culture and stuff to assimilate into whiteness and the racial hierarchical structures. 9. If the Creator made all the people of the world, then he wanted them to be as he created them. And so we must fight by every means to remain Angankwen Honanwi and not to be a part of the mongrel mixture in any melting pot. 10. We have more right to have a country in our own land, America, than do the Europeans, who say they were fugitives from European oppression and once established here, introduced their own brand of oppression. To regain their places among the sovereign nations of mankind, the Native Americans must fight for it. The law of nature. According to lessons of history, people who give up the struggle decrease in number, die out, and become extinct. People who continue to struggle increase in number, grow strong, and achieve survival. Forever life in Algonquin Warrior Society. Rugged men and exotic women arise. Take thy the sleepless enemy and by surprise. America, foreign great and absurd is ours. America, once a wide and free as woodland flowers, our mother polluted and by strangers blighted, call to us her children, who lay uprooted. We, the oppressed, like our mother, man demanded, and to a like fate by the foreigner condemned. Hear the call, hear the whisper, revenge, revenge. Hear the wind and the trees echo the word revenge. Even the rocks and the creeks murmur, revenge, revenge. Every man, woman, and child awake. Let us all, they used the color, men, arise and the shackles break. Let us once again stand in our 2 feet and fight. With knowledge and power can make things right. Let us the vision of Dunganunwanda realize. Let this great ancestor honor and revitalize. Be his great law our voice, will and strength. Be his name known and shout the entire length of this our man's great land of America. Here our American native shout Eureka. For every mountain top, prairie, and Sylvian retreat. Hear the distinct beat as every warrior's on his feet. Men and women of the Warrior Society, O thou, and thou alone, await thy destiny. There's a right and wrong way to fight. Power is great, and knowledge makes might. Man is certain and clever way move though. A 10,000 men equal though. Great are the rewards. Honor shall be thy fate. Take back what is thine and go. And gone, y'all, be thy hate. Courage, men, it is thine peace and country. Long live the Warrior Society. And that's the end of that. And now we're on rebuilding the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, but only in this book will I refer to Iroquois. I was given permission. Hello, everybody. All right. The seeds of decay are plenty before the Iroquois Confederacy becoming great and famous. The Five Nations had joined in the alliance under the guidance of the great founder Dunganawada, who wanted all the native nations in America to be members of an alliance which became known as the Iroquois Confederacy. He wanted all nations to be equal in power, influence, and legal authority. He had no plans for the super nation or nations to lord over other nations. Dunganawada wanted all the Haudenosaunee chiefs to be equal in power. He had no wish to see a single individual elected as a grand or supreme chief. As such, a position only leads to errors and corruption. He got the original Five Nations of the Confederacy to offer up the position of, quote, Grand Chief to the Creator, who does not err, cannot be corrupted, and does not die. The Great Law of Peace, the Great Law, began with 30 articles or wampums formulated by Dunganawada himself. Other laws were added to the rafters by the Grand Council in the following centuries as needed. It took 5 years for Dunganawada and Hiawatha, a transplanted Onondaga, who left his nation. Hello. Yes, I close. Oh, close. Okay. Thank you. Wait. What? Hold on a second, sorry. All right, cool. Other laws were added to the rafters by the Grand Council in the following centuries. Oh, wait, I already read this. Oh, yeah, okay, cool. Who left his nation because of persecution and suffered by his family and joined the Mohawks. Who recognized his special abilities and made him one of the Bear Clan chiefs to gather and join into alliances. The first Five Nations conceived they do find Dunganawada set out to gather more nations to join his great alliance. He was never seen again. It is believed that he came upon evil people and was killed. Deprived of his counsel and sound guidance, the people of the original Five Nations were not ready to act with good judgment when the outside nations came to join the alliance. Instead of making them equals, they put them in a subordinate state without a voice in the Grand Council. They came in, quote, on the cradle board. I'm getting closer? Damn. Thanks. Where I was at. Oh my gosh, Five Nations, the judgments, blah, 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 the alliance making them equals and putting them in a subordinate nation in the Grand Council. They came in on the cradle board, meaning they were treated like children and not allowed to develop their potential. In time, there were 28 of these independent nations of the Iroquois Protectorate of Indigenous Nations. The Five Nations became overlords of the 28 subordinate nations, now not what Dunganawada had in mind at all. Five Nations Grand Council even added, quote, a law to the rafters, end quote, that any adoption of the nation or nations shall be temporary, only subject to certain conditions, and they shall have no voice in grand councils or any authority. When Gananawada, I keep fucking it up, left to gather in more nations, he certainly did not want to bring them in, quote, on the cradle board, end quote, but as equals. As a consequence, when foreign European invaders arrived, they had only 5-nation confederacy to face instead of 33, which would have been the case had they given the 28 protectorate nations equality. The French invaders saw the protectorate situation and used the 28 protectorate nations as a tool to overcome the Iroquois. For 25 years, the French, with the help of their missionaries, coaxed and incited the independent indigenous nations, telling them, quote, they treat you like children. You have no voice in their council, end quote, until the protectorate indigenous peoples agreed to attack their protectors. Fortunately for the Iroquois, their own agents warned them in time. The conspirators can't keep anything secret for 25 years. Weeks before the expected attacks, and while still in wintertime, the Iroquois turned on their lightning war in strategy, which found its way into all books of war in military academies. In 1940, Schmittler admitted he got his idea from the Berserker, which means lightning war, from the Iroquois. More than a century of warfare followed. At the end of each time, the French had lost their landholdings in North America. The protectorate nations were all gone, but the Iroquois, bleeding and staggering, were still roaring and defiant. All this happened because some elitist Grand Council chief wanted equality for only 5 nations. Is not inconceivable that otherwise 100 or even 200 nations of indigenous peoples would now be members of the Iroquois Confederacy and mighty alliance of indigenous peoples in America. Lording it over other indigenous nations did the Iroquois no good. Not having a peacemaker, then Gananawada around to help make great decisions. The elitist chiefs could only see themselves as masters over all. Even at this late stage of the game, they still have this superiority complex. At the Grand Council in Onondaga in 1976, representatives of 2 outside indigenous nations made an appearance on the mission of joining in some kind of alliance with the 6 nations, one of them the Tuscarora, not having equality. The 2 visiting groups are the leading indigenous nations in their area. One was representing the Sioux Nation from the west, and the others were Chippewa from Ontario. Cradleboard. Yeah, what is cradleboard? What is cradleboard? Should I look that up? You think I'm going to find a good definition on like that? I don't think I'm going to find a good definition, to be honest. I think it's going to be saturated.
Cradleboard is specifically what we put babies on to make sure that they didn't get out of the cradle.
Oh, I think I've seen those before.
It's specifically it's talking about after the Peacemaker left to go find more people, we had a corrupt dictatorial leadership try to take over, and when they did, they ended up claiming that the nations that joined us couldn't join as the Peacemaker specifically said we should be doing it, and they went against the writings of the Great Law of Peace and brought them in as baby nations instead of actually having them have equality among us.
It sounds like the peacemaker was trying to consolidate all the nations into one, not exactly into one, but into a huge, because the more nations that are involved with this, the stronger the indigenous peoples can be, right?
Correct.
That's the whole thing, the consolidation. Okay, cool. When words got around about their missions, the Onondaga, Handsome Lake preacher Huron Miller, sitting against the well, became more enthusiastic. Enthusiastic. Quote, great. We'll put them under our wings, end quote. He said. Larry Redshirt of the Sioux Nation, the Sioux said, but we don't want to come in on a cradle board, end quote. Okay, now I get it. The elitist Grand Council chief would have it no other way. The Sioux and the Chippewa, is it Chippewa? I think it's Chippewa, yeah. Delegates didn't return. Quote, putting them under our wings implies the protectorate nonsense once again. How can the elitist Grand Council protect anyone when it can't even protect itself? It can only pretend to protect or defend, or it has buried its weapons in its fighting spirit and can only dream of the glories of the past. At this great late date, indigenous peoples all over America can do wonders by following the great plan of Dunganana Wada, by joining all American indigenous nations in one big alliance or confederacy, all the nations to be equal in power, influence, and legal authority. Had the original 5-nation Iroquois Confederacy followed Dunganana Wada's great plan, there would now be a confederacy of 200 or more nations. Nice. What kept the Iroquois down were their elitist chiefs who wanted equality for only 5 nations and subsections for all the others. It's up to the Iroquois people of the present who see the understanding and the problems to do something about it while there is still time. To understand the problem, it is necessary to drudge up some of the events of the past and oppose them for the people to see and understand, so they can see what to do about it. It's kind of like going back in history and trying to figure out what happened and figure out what we can do now. It's like historical materialism. and at the end, the American Revolution, which is, I would say, like we say, is a counter-revolution, because the Iroquois still had enough military power to force the new U.S. Republic to sue for peace in 1784. After the famous hit-and-run civilian raid in 1779, which killed 33 Senecas, the enthusiastic report said that the Seneca population was decimated, which means a tenth of the population had been killed. The Seneca total population couldn't have been only 330. Civilian reported destroyed certain towns he never even went near. The following years, 1780s, the Iroquois went on a rampage of their own, cleaning out 3 huge areas, Ohio being one of them. This was the last military action by the Iroquois in the United States, and would have split the new U.S. in half if the United States had not been able to get the indigenous peoples to agree to the 1781 Treaty of Peace. In 1797, Governor Morris of New Jersey State asked the Seneca Nation to hold a council. He was too old to make the trip himself, so he delegated his sons to perform a simple chore of buying 5 million acres from the Seneca land. Morris Jr. couldn't get all the Seneca chiefs to agree, so in the evening he broke open the whiskey barrel, and a party went on. By morning, everyone was so boozy and happy that the governor's son very easily persuaded the Seneca to part with the 5 million acres for $100,000. Even the Red Jacket was as drunk as a lord. So was the handsome Lake, whose name appears fourth on the list in the signatures on the agreement. When they sobered up and realized that what they had done, they swore off booze. The Senecas were very proud of this as abstinence, even if it lasted less than 2 years. In 1799, the Senecas went on the now famous spring hunt. When they returned, they had no meat, no furs, no money, but everyone was gloriously drunk. They had fallen off the wagon. Oh my gosh. They sobered up one by one. There was one who kept on drinking whiskey, and that was Handsome Lake. He stopped when he collapsed from the DTs. Donald Trump's just kidding. He came back to the land of the living after 4 days, not 4 years. The first person he saw was his nephew, Henry O'Bale, Cornplanter's son. Cornplanter was Handsome Lake's half-brother. When Handsome Lake's father died, his mother married a white man, and Cornplanter was the happy little result. Cornplanter grew up and married a white woman, and they had 3 boys, one of whom was Henry, who was only a quarter Seneca, but 100% Quaker. He was always trying to convert his uncle. Here he was at his famous uncle's besides listening on to his complaints. Quote, snakes, all sizes, all colors, wrapping themselves around me. It was horrible, end quote. Henry said, quote, don't tell anybody about anybody you saw snakes. Tell them you saw angels, and they took up to a place of everlasting fire and torment, where all drunks shall go when they die. The idea was so novel, the old drunk decided to help his nephew start a new religion. He preached against alcohol while trampling every chance he got. According to the story, Old Handsome was so fascinated by the new religion that he saw a way of dealing with his critics. According to the nephew, the Christian church burns heretics and witches at the stake. Since the critics didn't believe him, they were therefore heretics. The first was a woman he charged as a witch because she had calluses on her hands, oh my gosh, for working with the hoe in her garden. Either she forgot or Henry neglected to explain what witch hunters stuck needles into calluses, and if the subject suffered no pain, that was her witch mark, and therefore she was a witch. Handsome Lake merely said, quote, we've got calluses, and so you're a witch, end quote. The woman said, quote, if you did some work in your garden, you would have calluses too, end quote. Handsome Lake ordered his followers to kill her, and so buried her in her own garden. Two other critics followed the fate at the first. The fourth intended victim of being red jacketed. Is that okay to say? Does that have anything to do with?
You're good with saying that. Just to clarify, though, if you remember the Handsome Lake, that's where the Handsome Lake Code comes from. Remember how the Warrior Society condemns the Handsome Lake Code? This is specifically talking about the ones that joined into Christianity and used that as justification to do harms to our own people and tried to displace the Great Law of Peace with the Handsome Lake Code.
Understandable. Kind of a revisionist line, you know?
Correct.
Yeah. I'm going to reread it. The fourth intended victims was to be Red Jacket, and the most sarcastic of Handsome Lake critics. During a chief's council, Handsome Lake had broken out into a sermon and had suddenly become confused. He turned to his nephew Henry, sitting close by. He asked Henry, quote, what was it the angel said? Red Jacket, sitting across the house, asked, if the angel spoke to spoke to said, if the angel spoke to you, how is it it's your nephew who knows what the angel said. That earned the death penalty for Red Jacket. The Chiefs Council stepped in and stopped Handsome Lake's elimination of rivals. Red Jacket was the best orator they had even ever had, and they weren't about to allow him to be terminated by a boozy prophet. Handsome Lake charged Red Jacket with witchcraft. The Chiefs Council was held to hear Red Jacket's defense. Red Jacket spoke for a couple of hours in his own defense, describing how there cannot be any witches and that even the white man's church no longer burnt witches at the stake, having come to disbelieve such things. There is even a painting of the famous trial by the noted painter of the day showing the council in session and Red Jacket in full regula defending himself. The Seneca Council decided...
That word's regalia, by the way.
Regalia.
Regula. It's regalia.
Thank you. The Seneca Council decided there would be no more executions of witches. Then came the missing baby case. While working in the field, the woman hung cradle boards on branches on trees cut off for that purpose. A baby turned up missing. The next day, another baby disappeared. The next day, a guard cleverly hid himself. There came a shadow through the woods who looked figuratively around, grabbing one of the cradle boards and started off with it. He didn't get far before he was grabbed and overpowered. It was Handsome Lake. He banished him from the Seneca country like they would anyone convicted of murder. He was ostracized wherever he went. He ended up in Onondaga. They didn't want him there either, but he promised to make them the greatest of the Six Nations. If they allowed him to stay, the Onondagas must have been at the low ebb of their self-estimation. Anyway, they had to be plenty naive, hypnotized, or drunk to believe that a baby snatcher could make them the greatest of the Six Nations. But the Onondagas allowed him to stay, even let him live in the loft of the longhouse while he worked the miracles of making them the greatest. He was followed up into the woods where he made friends with snakes, letting them wrap themselves around him. He explained that it was necessary to do this to get the power to make them the greatest Six Nation. What's the significance of the snake? Is that a bad omen?
The snake is referring to YT colonizers.
All right, good. Understandable. All right. In between power-making exercises, he would visit the red light districts in the nearby Syracuse and arrive back home dizzy and staggering from all the loving cups of joy he had imbibed. There it goes, imbibed. In today's language, he was living it up. The longhouse in Onondaga achieved a curious aroma. And while the power maker was absent, one of the men climbed into the loft. The first thing he saw was arm hanging from a nail on the rafter. Then there were other arms and legs. At the end of the loft was a crate, which was duly noted to contain several squirming snakes. And a sober moment, the prophet was confronted for an explanation. The holy power maker reminded them how hard it was to make them the greatest and that he had to do the hardest things to get the power necessary to accomplish his goal and not to worry. He was getting there. Then the power maker became very sick. He achieved a power does at the houses of joy in Syracuse, that it was his habit to visit. He had all the variable diseases they had to offer. The poor fellow rotted before he died. No one could go near him. The toughest rolled him in his blanket and carted him to the swamp. There where they buried him, hoping the curative mud would stop the diseases from spreading into an epidemic. When they buried down the longhouse and built another one. Oh, they burned down the longhouse and built another one, which is now presently known as the quote unquote old one, thus passing away a famous religious maker. Time 1815. Meanwhile, the nephew Henry O'Bale was busy spreading the new gospel. 5 years after the death of Handsome Lake, Henry had the Handsome Lake Code completely organized, copying from the Quaker Code. Henry wrote the Handsome Lake Code completely with the repentance ritual, end quote, which makes it possible to go to heaven after committing the most revolting sins or crimes just by repenting every time. Going along with the peaceful nature of the Quaker Code, Henry instructed his Seneca cousins to bury their weapons and never again to fire them at anyone. Senecas got caught up in the religious fever, burying their weapons, and told the world they'd never fight again. They actually thought the whole world would copy their example. All it did was to encourage the white settlers to pour all over their lands, since it was now safe. The Handsome Lake religious fever spread to some confusion. Some of the Oneidas, Onondagas, and the Cayugas, right? The Cayugas. Yes, being close to the Senecas, got caught up in the frenzy. The Mohawks of Gananaqueki, the Asquanasi, the Kaneshte, had been prisoners of war of the French, who converted them by force to Roman Catholicism more than a century before the time of the Handsome Lake Code. In 1716, after 4 forced migrations, the Mohawks arrived at the present site of the Wengi. That same year, the Reverend Jesuits decided to move. You don't like Jesuits? Several hundred dissenters to the, oh my gosh, the Deluxe I don't know how to say these words. Holy shit. Let me find out what this
This is where it's going to get really complicated with words. I apologize.
The Lac des Daus Montagnes, where a village called the Gananhashtanakangui was established starting in 1754 and up to 1759. The Reverend Fathers removed half of the remaining Mohawks, 75 miles up the river, and were the patronage drums, and called the new town Asquanasi. We later found out that the Mohawks had refused to remain serfs who worked for nothing and were talking of national independency and sovereignty. Sound familiar? Anyway, the big increase in Mohawk members made the French nervous, and the Reverend Jesuits felt it was necessary to divide the Mohawks by then prisoners of war for over 100 years to keep them conquered. All Mohawks should get together again. They divided the people to conquer them, standing to reason the people should stay together. the free Mohawks living in Mohawk River Valley left the territory in 1783 because of the Revolutionary War. It wasn't until 1922, when they asked to be reinstated in the Six Nation Confederacy, that the Handsome Lake Code arrived at the three dividing Mohawk towns. The condoling chiefs from Ashwanaskan made the exception. Ashquanaski made the acceptance of the Handsome Lake Code on one condition from being reinstated. Not knowing the facts of the case, the Mohawks of Ashquanaski and Conquanaski and the Ganheshkanaski accepted. I'm sorry, everybody. Whew. I'm tired, as you can tell, too. When it became apparent that the Handsome Lake Code was a violation of the Great Law, the Mohawks of Ganquanaski and Ganhanastiki and half the Aquanasi repudiated the Handsome Lake Code. Not one of the existing Iroquois nations in 1820 had any idea of the result of accepting the Handsome Lake Code. Present-day followers of the Handsome Lake Code are convinced they have the answer to the problems of the world, even if it presumes solutions violate some laws of the Iroquois Constitution, also known as the Great Law. They have some well-trained speakers who promote the system they regarded as hope of the future. In all their speeches, they use the Two-Row Wampum Treaty as an example of our ancestors' intellect. That in that treaty, both the white man and they used the R word, man, agreed never to legislate for each other and to keep their laws, governments, religions, and customs in their respective vessels. The ship, in the case of the white man, and the canoe in the case of the indigenous people. The speaker fails to tell their audience that the Handsome Lake reached into the white man's vessel and took out the white man's religion and adopted it as his own. Doctrines such as hell, devils, angels, purgatory, etc., adopted by Handsome Lake are improbable Christian beliefs, and until they are proved, they shall not be regarded as knowledge system. They would be better left in the white man's ship, since they never did the white man any good morally or spiritually, only financially and politically. Of course, followers of the Handsome Lake may not think that taking the white man's religion out of his ship violates the Two-Row Wampum Treaty. Also, taking the white man's law as code means taking, quote, a body of laws of a nation. So incorporating another nation into your, and that's a violation. And that's a significant approach to saying that's the end of that nation. It's
a violation to the Great Law of Peace, because why would it be any good to take the laws of another nation when they don't have the same conditions as the nation that you currently live in? And it's just a disaster waiting to happen.
Yeah, agreed. Since the Handsome Lake Code was copied by the Quaker Code, it is a white man's law. It would be much better if we didn't boast about the Two-Row Wampum Treaty. Besides violating the Two-Row Wampum Treaty, the Handsome Lake Code also violates Wampum 25 and Wampum 58 of the Iroquois Constitution, the Great Law. In 1820, the Great Law was not written, was in written form. The people had to hear it recited from the wampums every 5 years. As a result, they did not know the law. Can anyone around remember anything recited 5 years ago, such as 117 articles of law? The promoters, Henry Obel and followers, were just as arrogant, ignorant, of the law as the people they were leading down to the garden path. The present controversy is a result of arrogance, ignorance. Yeah, no worries. The Great Law is now in written form, but the leadership of the Handsome Lake Code does not allow the followers to read it. It's a form of induced ignorance. Wampum 25, the Great Law provides a chief. If a chief of the league should seek to establish any authority independent of the jurisdictions of the league of the Great Peace, which is the 5 nations, at the time the law was made, he shall be warned 3 times in an open council, first by a woman, first by the women relatives, second by the men relatives, and finally by the chiefs of the nation to which he belongs. If the offending chief is still persistent, he shall be deposed by the war chief of his nation for refusing to conform to the law of the Great Peace. His nation shall then install the candidate nominated by the female name holders of his family clan. The Handsome Lake Code was established as the authority independent of the jurisdictions of the Great Law. All chiefs who participate in Handsome Lake Code are guilty of violations of Wampum 25 and can be disposed if they do not heed the 3 warnings and continue to practice this foreign code. Wampum 58, the Great Law provides in part. A further meaning of this is that if at any time any one of the chiefs of the league choose to submit to the law of a foreign people, he is no longer in but out of the league. The person of this class shall be called. They have alienated themselves. Tung kana hantankan gantan. Likewise, such persons who submit to laws of foreign nations shall forfeit all birthrights and claims of the 5 nation confederacy and territory. It submitted that the Handsome Lake Code, law of foreign people, the 6 nation people who are Handsome Lake followers, thereby alienated themselves from the Iroquois confederacy and territory. There is no necessity for the 3 warnings in this case. The Great Law was created for the people's protection and to keep them together in unity. There must have been a lot of confusion and misunderstanding in the Handsome Lake's time. In spite of such wise men as Red Jacket and others, the Handsome Lake Code was able to render asunder the peaceful unity of the Confederacy like no other force was able to. Let me make sure. What wars couldn't do, white man's religion easily did. It doesn't stop there. It seems that it did not occur to anyone at the time that the serious violations of the Great Law was being committed. That many, due to the fact that the Great Law was recorded in an unwritten language of the Wampums. We now see it in written form, so we can point out any law that is being violated. The Handsome Lake promoters were quick with their own law or taboo, which forbids the reading of the Great Law in its written form. One must wait to hear it recited orally every 5 years. How can we remember all that the man said? Or did the man remember to say all the laws? It requires a tremendous memory on the part of the reciter and his audience. No wonder the Handsome Lake followers did not know the law, and they were forbidden to read the Great Law. They were also forbidden to mention the name Denganawada. It looked like a conspiracy to do away with all traces of the peacemaker and his works. They are only permitted to mention his name of Handsome Lake. Some conspiracy is afoot to be put to put the Iroquois people in a daze and brainwash them into dissolving the great Iroquois Confederacy. They are doing away with the Great Law. It's a forbidden book. They have buried their weapons. They are trying to abolish the war chief and his men. Warrior Society. The followers of the Handsome Lake Code deposed abolished the centuries-old institutions of the war chief, who's going to depose an errant chief now. They announced that there is no more Warrior Society, the people's power. It is the duty of all Iroquois people who are faithful in the Great Law to strengthen out the followers of the Handsome Lake Code. It is the duty of the Iroquois people to remove the intruding code, which is usurping the place of the Great Law. To any ideas or fear that the removal of the Handsome Lake Code means the cancellation of all ceremonies and rituals of the Longhouse, it must be impressed on the interest parties that these ceremonies and rituals were the existence of and in use hundreds of years before the Handsome Lake Code arrived on the scene. The only ritual to give up is the quote repentance ritual, which came with the intruding code and permits that any sin or crimes, no matter how grievous, can be committed and will be forgiven just by repenting each time. It is an open invitation to any good persons to do any evil, since it's so easy to be forgiven. It simply doesn't make sense, the Mohawk definition of repent. It means that the repenter makes a pledge that, as the Creator is his witness, what he did he will never do again. That he keeps repenting shows that he keeps breaking his pledge over and over again. This of course is an insult to the Creator, who is his witness. The people are better off without this insulting repentance ritual. The dictionary defines repent as to feel sorry without any pledge, never to do it again. And I'm going to do this. Here we go. The Sagarata Rete Gankararisten. In Mohawk meeting, I am sorry. The Sagar Terathari Waganti means I repent and pledge never to do it again. The word repent does not mean in Mohawk what it means in English. Burying the weapons doesn't seem like much to be sacrificed. Peace-minded folks will tell you that the world would know peace if all the world would only bury all its weapons. Peace by peaceful means. Doesn't it seem so logical? In 2 world wars, they only got peace after killing 9 million people in the first and 56 million in a second. Why didn't they bury their weapons instead? They'll tell you they couldn't have gotten the peace without the weapons. If there were no weapons, they'd have fought with bare bands, which no doubt they did the first time they came to clash. In any event, it's the stronger who gets peace. What happens when one or a whole nation buries its weapons? In the case of the Handsome Lake folks, it became easier for the white settlers to take over their lands. Without even thinking about it, the good folks also buried their fighting spirit. What's wrong with that? It seems that the world is such that life is a struggle, and one needs fighting spirit to cope with life and life struggles. The 10-year study was made on the causes of national distinctions, such as those suffered by classical Greeks, Romans, Phoenicians, Persians, and other great civilizations, once numbering in the millions and now all gone. The professor came up with 4 great causes of extinction. 1. Loss of language. 2. Disregarding the laws that made them great. 3. Disregarding the economic systems that made them strong and great. 4. Doing nothing about their spies and traitors. The greatest single cause was, quote, giving up the struggle, end quote. People who gave up the struggle decreased in numbers, grew weaker, died out, and became extinct. People who continued to struggle increased in numbers, grew stronger, and survived. To explain these strange acts of life, let's take the Onondagas and the Mohawks, for example. The Onondagas, once more numerous than the Mohawks, accepted the Handsome Lake Code and lost their original Iroquois language, which is still spoken by Mohawks, and now by Onondagas speaks a dialect, quote unquote, which is said to be quote, a language reduced by baby talk, end quote. Having buried their weapons and their fighting spirit, and having given up the struggle. 10 years ago, their numbers was given at 900, and this year their number is said to be down to 500. The Mohawks still speak of original Iroquois language and did not bury their weapons and in fighting spirit. They did not give up the struggle, and their numbers exceed 50,000. To one who is not slated for extinction, it may seem easy to stop the slide to extinction. Not only are the Onondagans decreasing to reverse the trend, and potential victims victims would be required to change their lifestyles. Oh my gosh, my reading's horrible today. Hold on a second. They would have to start struggling. The first thing to realize is that the extinct civilization did not think that they were slated for extinction. They did nothing about their decreasing numbers. They did not think they would become extinct. In fact, that there were millions of them, and they should be a cause for reflection. The writer heard an Onondaga chief say that the Creator will not permit the indigenous people to be destroyed. According to him, God will save the indigenous peoples. There are extinct indigenous nations. God did not save them. God helps those who help themselves. So unless the people themselves do something about their precarious positions, they were sure to disappear. The way to save themselves is right there in front of everyone. While it seems easy to one who is not in that precarious position, it may be monumental task for the potential victims. They shall have to change their lives around. Since the results are worthwhile, let us get right down to it. The first order of business would be to unbury their weapons and their fighting spirit. Let the people receive their warrior society and restore the war chief. Doing this much makes a bigger difference. There is an immediate lifting of the spirit, the will to live and to regain springs back to life. Making sure probably nothing. All right. Number 1, relearn the original Iroquois language. The Mohawks still speak it and will be glad to teach it. Number 2, reactivate and reassert the great law. It is the law made by indigenous peoples. The Handsome Lake Code is a law made by white people, for it's a copy of a Quaker code. Give it back to the Quakers, along with the unreasonable repentance ritual, which makes a repenter think he can commit the worst evils and get away with it just by repenting. Number 3, revive the cooperative economic systems used by our ancestors and in use today at Geneshkin. Number 4, do something about the spies and traitors. They hack away at every existence of the people, and they are one of the 4 main causes of the extinctions of great civilizations of the past. The Great Law is a law in use in Geneshkin. The only place in America where the indigenous peoples have full control of authority. It was established by the Mohawk Warrior Society, which shows that the Warrior Society can do. It shows why the Warrior Society should be revived by the indigenous nations, the Onondagas, and other indigenous nations in danger of extinction shall have to become like the Mohawks. Struggle, fight, and win. All right, the lessons we have learned up to this point. Hold on a second. All right. 1. Our ancestors should follow Dunganawada's great plan to make all American indigenous nations equal in power, voice, and authority in the Iroquois Confederacy, instead of having an ego-indulging elite group of just 5 nations lording it over other nations. The Iroquois Confederacy had a chance to create a mighty union of indigenous nations in control of all of America, and the European invaders would not have been able to gain a foothold on they used the R word, man's land. It is not too late to organize huge confederacy or republics of indigenous nations like that envisioned by Dunganawada, the greatest American. It represents a big challenge to the abilities of the present day true Americans, the indigenous race. 2, the ancestors should have made the great law more available to be learned and studied, so the violations of the law, such as the usurpation of the authority of the great law by the white man's Quaker Code, which masqueraded as the Handsome Lake Code, could have been avoided. 3, every nation on earth has armed forces for defense and protection. All nations of the future multinational confederacy shall receive well-trained, powerful warrior societies, and all war chiefs shall be equal in power and authority. The most important requirements of the people of mankind have been the government, the law, the economic systems of religion. Some may place them in a different order. How about Indigenous Republic, 1984 idea? The indigenous nations of North America, greetings. The word, quote unquote, unity has been worked to death. At this stage of our experiences with the benedictions of from Europe, which are now legislating our national demise and finally carrying out the legal genocide of the indigenous race, we are now considered to be in a completely weakened state and ripe for extinction. Let's all of us indigenous peoples in America organize. No, I am not trying to make you laugh. True, the indigenous peoples have tried to organize many times in the past. The reason this time is different. The legislators of Sir Caucasians are deliberately on our national and racial demise. Yes, no D. They shall pass an order in councils declaring us dead, nationally and racially. We shall declare that we have joined their nation. We have joined their nations and are no longer legally indigenous peoples. They shall proclaim that the indigenous race is no more, and that the nations of that race have joined the white race. Where are the indigenous peoples who want this? They want to commit racial and national self-unalignment. Anyone who commits self-unalignment, whether physical or national, is of unsound mind. He no longer has the instinct of self-preservation for his physical and national life, which is a part of his mental equipment. Those of us who are of sound mind have no wish to become extinct. We wish to see our race live on. We also are of sound mind and have no wish to join another nation or race. Let's strive to be equal to any other race or nation, but not by joining another race. Let us create a republic of indigenous nations, sovereign and independent, on this great, they use the R word, man's land of ours. We know that our great ancestor, Dangana Weta, did create the Republic of Indigenous Nations. He wanted all the indigenous nations to be members of equal partners. He was able to gather only 5 nations in his time. He left the gathering of nations for his successors to continue. They did gather indigenous nations, but not as equal partners. Instead, they created an empire of protectorates nations, which was not the aim, purpose, and intentions of our great founder. Did any empire ever last? The weakness of an empire is in the subject nation. The Iroquois Empire went the way of all empires, to destruction. If the subject nation had been given equality, that a mighty republic it would be today. The subject nation of the Iroquois protectorates were incited by clever missionaries to attack their protectorates. It took a quarter of a century of urging and congealing to make them take such a drastic step. The Iroquois Confederacy, to save itself, had to fight the people if it was protecting. The war lasted more than 100 years. By each time the protectorate, indigenous nations had mostly become extinct. The French instigators had lost their land possessions in Canada, and the Great Iroquois Confederacy, though reduced and weakened, was still fighting and struggling. Let's not make the same mistake. Let's make a republic of equal indigenous nations. All indigenous peoples need each other to survive. The present day Iroquois Confederacy is no longer a great powerful league of indigenous nations. To compound its weaknesses, it was coined into accepting the Handsome Lake religion, which features impoverable white man's doctrines, such as hell, devils, and other vague mysteries. It also had to bury its weapon in the mistaken, mislead, and deluded belief that Uncle Sam would protect it. In all treaties, Sir Caucasian always engaged to protect the indigenous party of the treaty, but never really does any protecting. Those are just empty words. The Iroquois ended up having to protect the English colonies. Not all the 6 nations fell for the, quote, bearing of the weapons trick. Many centuries before Handsome Lake, there was bearing of weapons, but only among the 5 original nations. The occasion was the formation of the 5 Nations Confederacy. They pledged never to make war on each other again. But if they were attacked by enemies, they would ally themselves to fight together and repel invaders. The latter-day acts of, quote, bearing the weapons is different. It's not to stop fighting amongst themselves, but to never fight again, even if attacked. They would allow themselves to be shot down without defending themselves. It's a death wish religion. There's a white man hand in this business somewhere no longer needed Iroquois protection. White men now wanted the Iroquois to be so weak they'll wish and will themselves to oblivion. The Mohawk Nation was an organized warrior society to defend and protect the people. The Oneidas at the 32-acre territory at Oneidas at the 32-acre territory at Oneida, New York, have received their warrior society. The Tuscarora have received their warrior society. The Six Nation people who follow the Handsome Lake Code are not allowed to have a warrior society or to fight in self-defense. When asked what they would do if attacked, an Onondagan chief said, "That's when we'll meet our maker," meaning they'll not even fight to defend their lives. When the Onondagas had trouble on their highway, they had to call up the Mohawks and the Tuscarora to do their fighting. Once protectors of nations, they now need protection themselves. The Iroquois have the strongest of the indigenous treaties with the United States. The United States engages never to disrupt the people of Six Nation in the freeing use of employment thereof land. In spite of this treaty, the U.S. went ahead and disrupted the Six Nation people by constructing the Kanzua Dam, as well as making countries of the Seneca Nation land the U.S. side of Asquanacy. The people can't put up a fight besides protesting because it's against the new Handsome Lake religion, which forbids fighting. Real quick, I'm just gonna look ahead. $269. Okay, good. We're there. 269. All right. The Mohawk Nation is the most powerful of the Iroquois Confederacy. It has not buried its weapons. With so many indigenous nations on the uprise and ready to fight for their lives, their lands, and their survival, it is impossible for these emerging indigenous nations to ally themselves with the Mohawk Nation. The Oneidas and the Tuscarora, others of the Six Nations may want to be involved in this great work if they can break away from the weakening influence of the Handsome Lake Code on the equal footing and creating a new republic of indigenous nations. Being of sound mind, the emerging indigenous nations did not bury their weapons and can organize their warrior societies. An alliance of all indigenous nations on an equal basis would have pleased the greatest American Danganawada, because that's what he wanted. The founder of the greatest political society ever devised by man, the Iroquois Confederacy, preached peace among all indigenous nations through law, the great law. He also preached peace through the power achieved by many nations allied together. So let's gather the indigenous nations together and make a treaty of alliances among them all. Let all the people of said indigenous nations hold the pledge, wampum, and solemnly declare to defend and protect the people of each member nation, and pledge to follow and defend the great law of peace, mankind's first and greatest national constitution. It made the Iroquois powerful and great while they followed it. It shall make the new republic of indigenous nations strong. Indigenous peoples need power. It is greatly acknowledged that the government devised by Danganawada is the most practical, intelligent, and moral. It's the best guide to follow. Its natural It's natural for people to laws and systems only to discover later that the new laws and systems they devised were not so good after all. It's best to use a proven system which has stood for ages, such as the Great Law. Wampum 74 and 77 were legislated after Danganawada was long gone. They began with, quote, when any alien nation, non-white people were around at the time, or individuals is admitted into the league, the admission shall be understood only to be a temporary one. Wampum 74 and 77 are the flaw of the Great Law. They do not reflect the purpose and the intentions of the founder, Danganawada, and, as before stated, led to the downfall of the Iroquois Empire and the protectorate nations. And the end result is the weakness of the Confederacy today. Whenever the Grand Council or any individual national councils of the Iroquois Confederacy passes an issue or make a decision, the people are in general regard as a bad decision, harmful or injurious to the nation or nations. The people in general may hold a people's council to decide that the chief's decision should be recalled, and the Grand Council or the individual nations' councils shall be required to reconvene their councils and recall their errant decisions and agree with the people's council's decision, as after all, the Iroquois government is a people's government. In order to implement Danganawada's plan of the Great Confederacy of all indigenous nations, all equal to power of Wampums 74, 75, 76, and 77, shall have to be revoked by the People's Council and stricken from the Great Law, and different laws substituted whereby new member nations shall be admitted and given equality with the other nations. The People's Council has the power to do this, or to even depose all the chiefs if necessary. All the new member nations are required to do is to follow the Great Law, which also makes it possible not to have too many laws, which is the universal complaint among nations these days. The government and the law of the great peacemaker Danganawada is hereby recommended to any projected republic of indigenous nations. The white man says he has the best form of government. He calls it the government of the majority. It has been said that the majority of the world are fools and that the wise and intelligent are the minority. This makes the majority government a government of fools. But Sue's though, the majority of the world is controlled by a clever minority of oppressive exploiters, which make the majority government actually the minority government. And so it's a government of both fools and the clever exploiters, with the latter running the show. The standing armies is an arm of the government trained to protect, defend the systems, not the people. The government uses the people, for the armed men are of the people. The government creates laws designed to defend and protect the government from the people. The police departments are established to enforce the laws, again using some of the people whom they first alienated by indoctrination from other people to protect the systems from them. The exploited people are required to pay taxes in enormous amounts of pay the cost of this institutions, the government, the standing army, and the sitting police departments. The white man's majority government is really not a government for all the people, but for the super rich who are in control. The same super rich are also in control of the, quote, free world. It seems reasonable to expect the world revolution in the not too distant future. A little bit of like state and revolution there. Jesus, that was cool. All right. I think we're done right now. We are done. We stopped on 271. 271. Interesting. That gave a little bit of state and rev right there. $271. Outstanding. All right. All right. I am tired, to be honest with you. I am so tired. Probably just going to close it for right now because I'm tired. So I wish everybody, I didn't get to vet till late and I woke up. So all right, everybody. Well, I'm going to go ahead and close it out. I'll be continuing it tomorrow.